Okay, so let's start, Shivangi then. Okay, so
Yes, Pranshu, let's start.
yeah. A very warm welcome to everyone who is is present here, and I'm really delighted to have a very august gathering today on the panel, and really looking forward to hear. So this is the second series of this webinars where the focus is on looking at different aspects of circularity and then going into detail of those aspects. So the first webinar series was started last year. We had 8 episodes. And in this webinar series, again, we are covering 8 different episodes. Today, the focus is on creating a level playing field. One of the biggest challenges, from what I have understood and what I hear from not just in India but across the world, is business models never flourish if there is absence of a level playing field. Whether it is from a recycling point of view, whether it is from creation of new product service models, any big transformative change that we are looking for, they would not happen if the level playing field is not there, and if let's say unfairness continues to stay in the system. So the dialogue today is, how do we ensure that we are able to create a level playing field for all different types of players, whether they are recyclers, whether they are brands, whether there are anyone who is operating in this space. How do we ensure they feel that there is no uh, unfair treatment? Everyone is given the same benefits. If they are doing hard work, if they are putting extraordinary efforts, if they have invested heavily in some great technologies, then they are, let's say, treated differentially on that aspect. And there is no free riding. A lot of systems globally have collapsed in the space of circular economy or EPR based regimes when there has been free riding. So the dialogue today is primarily focused on how do we ensure that there is a level playing field. And we have a very good group, and I think the whole group needs no introduction. With me, I would first of all really like to say thank you to Shri Ashish Tiwari ji. He has been, let's say, for me personally, as for Karo Sambhav, as well as for this whole group, he has always shown the way. And not only shown the way, has also implemented things that we have debated, discussed in such sessions. And that is what we are really looking forward to. So, sir, over to you. We are really looking forward to hearing from you on how do we progress on this journey. UP especially has in the last 2-3 years made a very ambitious plan in this direction. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Pranshu, and thank you all the panelists and participants. It's pleasure for me always to be in a discussion on circularity. And UP, I always say, is not a state, but it is sixth largest country if it be a country. It has got population of 250 millions, over 250 millions, and you can say the grandness of UP is more than 58,000 gram panchayats and over 750 urban local bodies. So it's like UP leads the country in every aspect, whether it is any new kind of intervention or so as to say on a lighter side to politics also. So coming back to the core discussion on circular economy, creating a level playing field is really very important, no doubt about that. And if we draw our this thing experience from recently developed portal by CPCB for plastic waste management, then you can really appreciate that it is a big step towards creating a level field. The creating a level field, I would say, would be in 5 respects, would be very necessary, like giving all of them equal opportunities. Like today, our urban local bodies can also be registered as recyclers. So there is new kind of a way of learning among urban local bodies. And you would really be surprised that we as an environment department, we were asked by Urban Development Secretary to develop a kind of a guideline wherein the small urban local bodies can be registered as a processor, because they are also doing part of waste processing, particularly in view of plastic waste. Second would be the kind of the transparency of illegality. Like UP is a state which also has, like every other state, because electrical and electronic waste processing has illegal processing is a very big issue. Like I remember when I was member secretary of UP Pollution Control Board, we removed 25,000 cubic meter of black powder from a river bed of Ramganga in the year 2019. So Muradabad used to be a hub of illegal waste processing, electrical and electronic waste processing. So now we are trying to bring in transparency, and even our local administration and every stakeholder knows that there is a kind of illegal processing, and up to some extent there is a check to it, but definitely we will have to give them alternatives also. So creating level field is from all sides, from bigger stakeholders and from unorganized sectors also. The government should come forward and give them equal opportunity to join in an organized sector. Like now UP is under export promotion and employment investment and employment promotion policy is giving a huge push to the kinds of investments which will be attracted towards electrical and electronic waste processing. And there are challenges of land, etc. But definitely government is very serious in developing a kind of a, you can say, organized hub in Moradabad. And UP Electronics Corporation is very aggressively discussing with the stakeholders, and they can be provided support under the UP investment and employment promotion policy. So this was the second aspect, like hand holding the unorganized sector would also be a kind of uh, uh, giving them a level field so that they can also find a way to join organized sector. Third would be, of course, the data transparency. Like the tracking of the waste is very, very important. Unless we have proper tracking of the waste, we won't be able to create a level field. Be it air pollution, be it water pollution, be it kind of a waste, we must know where is the source, where is the sink, and what is the trajectory. If that kind of a transparency in the waste value chain is created, then probably the level field will be there for every stakeholder in the value chain. When it comes to transparency, I think in our country, the digital revolution, like digitalization of the data and putting the data in public domain, plays a very, very vital role. I'll take example of ease of doing business. Like many states like UP, Telangana, etc., which are among the top in ease of doing business category. The only thing which ease of doing business framework has done is putting more and more data on a public domain. So regarding the waste processing, if we create a dedicated portal wherein the waste tracking system is there, and we can put our data on a public domain which is verifiable by different stakeholders, then probably that will help. And of course, now on carbon side also, the SEBI has mandated the disclosures on ESG and the carbon disclosures also for the big 1,000 companies. I think the same analogy can be applied for public disclosures also. And we really believe in like our municipal corporations are also going to disclose the kind of waste that is being generated and the kinds of waste, legacy waste they are having, and so that they really can do kind of an internal monitoring before going to the public domain. So these are the few things which are the principles under level playing field. But if we talk of electrical and electronic waste, then probably if we talk of the 5-6 major waste streams, starting from electrical and electronic waste, then for electrical and electronic waste, for creation of facilities in organized sector would be very, very important. If we go to plastic waste management, then thanks to Swachh Bharat Mission 2.0 and other schemes of Mahua, that there is no dearth of funds. The only thing is we will have to handhold our urban local bodies to develop successful models for waste processing. That will create a level playing field for urban local bodies, which are the major stakeholders. And if there are certain waste streams which are completely neglected, like recently our state has started having a dialogue with tire waste stakeholders. So that is also a kind of a waste, like number of vehicles rising, be it electric vehicle or ICS vehicle, it will use the tire, and tire waste would come out. Battery waste, Pranshu, you have sensitized us. I am really thankful to you. You and Dr. Mukesh Sharma from IIT Kanpur, you really have sensitized us on battery waste value chain, waste processing value chain. And there also it is it is such a field which needs government attention. And we have started working on battery waste management. And lastly, the textile waste, because production waste in the textile sector is also a major challenge. So these are the areas where, in fact, you will see major policy decisions in near future. And definitely, whatever policy decisions are there when it comes to governance and implementation, then probably the principles of creating level playing field would be very, very important. And I am really thankful to you all, and we really believe in collaborating. And I invite you all to collaborate with this country, sixth largest country in the world, so that we can collaboratively build a very robust kind of system. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for a delightful talk. Thank you for throwing light on so many different aspects of multiple types of waste stream. Let us take some questions, from the panel, or if there is anyone in the participants, because I think sir has some other appointments. So if there are any questions for sir, please feel free to either write them or raise your hand if there are any people in the panel who would like to ask any questions. Then let's take some of these things.
Hi, this is Tamara. I would be happy to take the opportunity for a question. And thank you indeed for a very insightful speech. And I recognize the elements that you mentioned. I was wondering how does the current business landscape respond to either the laws that might come their way, and or are they taking responsibility themselves for the waste stream? So do you already see a shift from the business sector, that they see an opportunity in turning waste into resources?
Yeah, actually, the stakeholders, the waste generators, they are in fact taking the responsibility for the waste processing under EPR regime. And I would cite an example of like pre-production waste of paper and pulp industries in our state, which is there in Muzaffarnagar and Meerut region. There are so many paper and pulp industries, and they use waste paper. And if you use waste paper, then plastic waste will come out. So earlier, that kind of a waste used to be dumped here and there and probably going to drains also. But later on, see, there is a lot of strength in dialogue and of course, providing solutions, hand-holding them. Then we as a pollution control board and the government, we interacted with the stakeholders and provided them a solution. We like bring on board the cement power plant of Ultratech, which is in Chittor, Rajasthan, which is of course a quite far from Nagar. But production waste of plastic from waste has started going for co-processing to Uttar. And you won't believe the transportation cost is shared by the paper and pulp industry stakeholders. So it's basically the dialogue and providing the ways has a lot of strength where the government has a larger role to play.
Okay, thank you for sharing that example.
Yeah. Sir, I have a question, and just building on some of the points that you have made. Do we see a very strong role of benchmarking and standardization in this space as we go ahead? Because this is today I am at the Department of Telecommunication. Government of India is now writing a whole strategy on how do we ensure telecommunication in this country goes circular over the period of next decade. And this is coming as a very, very critical point that today we don't really have standards either for recycling nor for recovery of materials. So is there something that, because sometimes these things are dealt only centrally. Can a state take, a proactive action in that front, especially, with a leader like you and drive some of these things?
Yes, I don't think that there is any divide in the mandate for taking of benchmarking initiatives on the waste streams. I think state can really take up and be it like a collection of waste, there has to be some benchmarking standards also. Unless you have a proper benchmarking standards, your waste will not be generating economies. Secondly, like your processing, etc. The processing part, whether it is a pre-processing or processing or segregation, that part is looked after largely by the states. And you see the authorization is given by pollution control boards, etc. So I think really benchmarking is a thing which can be very easily mandated by way of conditions of the consent or authorizations which are given by pollution control boards. So I think the states can come forward and do it. The only thing is we really need to have a kind of a knowledge on benchmarking, because here the reason is the enforcement power, or you can say building some regulation, rests with Environment Department, Pollution Control Board. But the knowledge about electrical and electronic waste, the core knowledge rests with the METI and the stakeholders like you. But parallel to that METI kind of organization is, I think, state has a confusing state of affairs. There is no clear-cut mandate. There is a UP Electronics Corporation which has got varied mandates, and there is a Department of Science and Technology which is also not having electrical and electronic waste in the forefronts of their work portfolio. So I think bringing knowledge to a state would be one thing, but definitely states can work upon regulation side.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Any other questions from any of the panelists? I'll also check the chat if there is anything.
I don't see any questions in the chat, Pranshu. So,
okay. So
if any of the panelists have any further questions.
Yeah. Sir, if not, we would really like to, thank you. It's always a delight to have you, as a person who is giving the opening address. Please accept our deepest gratitude. And I'd like to, Shivangi, then hand over to you to carry forward the proceedings. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you all the panelists and participants. Thank you so much. I would beg your
Thank
pardon.
you so much, sir.
I have to go on the meeting. Thank you.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So, welcome everyone. I think Pranshu was already welcomed, but after that amazing opening speech by Mr. Ashish Tiwari ji, let me introduce our panel to you. We have an amazing group of panelists today for the discussion on how can we create a level playing field. What's the importance and ultimately what are the steps we can take, initial steps and long-term steps we can take to make sure that we are starting off on the right foot. So starting off from our first panelist, Swati Singh Sambyal. She's an international circular economy expert. Our second panelist is Tamara Veldboer, who's a business strategies lead at Circular Economy. Our third panelist is Deepali Sinha Khetriwal, international sustainability consultant and a social entrepreneur. And our fourth panelist is Sri Shantanu Kumar Dutta, member secretary from Assam State Pollution Control Board. I welcome the entire panel to this discussion. Before we open with our questions and our discussion points, just to inform the entire panel board and the participants who are listening in today, we have a panel discussion for 45 minutes approximately, during the discussion for each question, each panelist will have approximately 4 minutes so that we are on time, because it's a topic if we start discussing, especially with this sort of a panel, we can keep going on for a long time. So we have roughly restricted answers to about 4 minutes, and we'll have an open session for question and answers towards the end of the discussion. So starting with my first question. Yeah. So Deepali, I have a first question for you actually. Okay. So from your perspective, considering your experience in electronic waste for material recycling and for recovery of secondary raw materials, how can establishing these standardized practices contribute to creating this level playing field for a circular economy?
Great, thanks Shivani, and thanks to Karo Sambhav for this invitation. It was really interesting to hear, from the member from Mr. Tiwari, and then of course I'm really looking forward to listening to all the other panelists as well. To your question on how the standards really help in creating a level playing field, I mean that's the basic principle of or the reason for standards. Uh, if you look at standardization, for time or for weights and measures, uh, the reason why they came about was because you needed to have the same understanding between two people. You could not say 12 o'clock in Delhi is the same as, you needed to say 12 o'clock in Delhi is the same as 12 o'clock in India. You could not say, oh, my 12 o'clock is 12 o'clock and somebody else's 12 o'clock could be something else, right? So you needed to have Indian standard time. So the same way, 1 kg of potatoes is the same, whether it's in Delhi or Calcutta or Bangalore or, Chennai, and then you're really sure that you're getting a kg of tomatoes. So potatoes or tomatoes these days, they are more valuable. So you have of course the fact that you get uniformity, that exactly the same measure is valid across everywhere, and you have consistency, right? 1 kg now is also going to be 1 kg later. It's not going to change. It's not going to change from place to place, from person to person. And so as a consumer, you have more faith in what you buy, right? So taking that same analogy to recycling, as a consumer, if I'm a producer looking for EPR certificates, I need to know that if I'm buying, a certificate which says 1 ton of gold recycled, I know exactly what that is. It does not matter whether it is recycler 1 or recycler 2 or recycler 3. Unless you have a way to say it is exactly the same, it is comparable, it is verifiable, there is no trust in the system. And all that, whether you can verify it, whether you can compare it, whether you can, be able to justify, go back, trace it, back to its origins. All that comes through standardization, because you have to collect data for it. You have to have reporting. You have to have, ways of defining it. So that's why I think standards play an absolutely central role in bringing that level playing field, because then everybody knows what is being sold and what is being bought.
Yes, absolutely. And also from the perspective of just also to a certain extent standardizing the quality of output that you're getting, or at least a label way of making sure that we know what quality of output we are getting. At least as a secondary raw material, the person who's buying the secondary raw material then knows what they're buying. Right. But on that question, actually, I do have a follow-up question, because uh, it's it's understandable to want to have standards and best practices established. But what are the key challenges that you've seen in not just the setting of these standards, but also the adoption of these standards?
Shall I continue, Shivani, or is this for someone else?
No, it's for you, please.
Okay. So, I think in India, we still don't have setting standards where, you have the standards already in place. So the implementation is still far away. We have to first actually sit all of us together and set those standards. And I think that's really important, that the standards are set with that complete ecosystem, right? You cannot just say that the recyclers set standards. And also at the same time, you cannot say only the producers set standards, or you cannot say only the government set standards. I think it has to be done in a way that is practical and collaborative, because you could have the best standards, but if they're not practical, nobody's going to be able to follow them. You could have the best recycling standards set by the producers, but if the recyclers do not have the capacities, they will not be able to meet them. And at the same time, the recyclers can set the standards which may not be acceptable to producers. So you need to have everybody there to make sure that the standards, first of all, have the right threshold, right? You cannot have such low standards that it doesn't really matter whether there is a standard or not. So you need to have standards with a certain amount of ambition, so that you make sure that you're improving the system. And it gives that filtering effect where you can say, okay, this is the minimum standard. You need to meet this to play this game. And the other thing is to make sure that the standards are also adaptable, right? And I'll give you an example here. When I started my research, which was like 20 years ago, CRT TVs were the big problem, right? So if you just said, oh, we have a standard now for CRT TVs recycling and we are sorted, today that standard would be completely useless, because you don't have as many or very few CRT TVs coming, and you have to actually look at other technologies, right? So those standards for processing monitors need to be adapted as well. So you need to have a system which keeps that evolving, which keeps that renewed, and it is dynamic. And the only way to do that is have data, is have constant dialogue, and have like an institutional framework to keep that kind of ongoing evolution. So yeah, that's how I think that level playing field and the challenges of implementing are then overcome, because you can set standards which are then implementable.
Absolutely, absolutely. But actually, your answer reminds me of a question. Tamara, this question is for you, actually. Considering circular economy's work, your approach has always allowed decision makers to develop these strategies and implement them. Right. So what are the specific steps and methodologies that circular economy uses to unite these stakeholders and make sure this crucial data and these actionable strategies are being discovered? Just to add on to that as well, there's a second smaller question. And how can these steps or strategies that we are identifying be adapted to a particular region? Because I think we all know region to region, your entire demography changes so much, and your consumption patterns, destruction pattern, waste patterns change so much. How can we adapt these strategies for different regions and for different businesses?
Yeah, good point. Thank you for that question. So I will do my best to share the steps as we apply them and make that as vivid as possible. So basically, with my team, we mainly work with businesses to help them identify the opportunities they can pursue when it comes to the circular economy. So we typically approach that in 3 steps for them to understand whether it is at a product level or at a specific full value chain or product category or the whole company. The first step basically starts with understanding their status quo. So a key methodology that we use here is material flow analysis. So basically saying, okay, what is the start of your value chain, where resource extraction happens? What are the key steps that take place from you to get your resources to your production facilities, for example, to your customers, and eventually, when it's at end of use, the various end of life routes such as landfilling or incineration, or hopefully, of course, the recycling route, if higher R strategies such as reuse and repair have not been, are no longer useful. But so that is really the first step. And as much as possible, so this is both qualitatively, that we want to visualize that value chain with the MFA methodology, and if the data is available, also quantify these streams. And why that is important and what is a key success factor of this step is if you take that full value chain perspective. So as a company that you're forced to already look outside of your company boundaries, that it's easier to understand that if you want to switch to circular business models, you will need collaboration across your value chain, but also the wider system that is involved. So of course, also involving local policymakers, your customers, and educating them. I heard the word knowledge, educating them how they can apply also circular strategies in helping a product, for example, that they buy being used for longer, or knowing if you don't want a product anymore, what is the best route to get it into the right waste stream. So then on to the second step. So if you understand your status quo today, then it's about looking at the future. So understanding where the hotspots for change are. So what are the most material streams to focus on if you want to make it circular. Then we work with the various stakeholders that we've identified, for example, within a business, or sometimes also with their external stakeholders, to start envisioning the future. So how can you get your various stakeholders united about around a shared vision of what circularity means in this specific context, to also indeed already take a step forward to your add-on question? How do you indeed acknowledge the fact that one circular business model might not be relevant for a specific product or company, but also might not be relevant in a specific country, because maybe certain recycling facilities aren't available, or even repair is not available? Then it might be difficult to extend the lifetime of a product, and maybe it's a better alternative to make sure this product finds a different route to a different geography or even industry. But so if you really bring all the stakeholders on board and let them share their perspectives, and let them bring in their idea of what a circular value chain or a circular business model can look like, you build very important support. And at the same time, you also make the room to educate and do this knowledge transfer about circular principles, because we also have to acknowledge the fact that not everyone will already have the right skills or knowledge about what the circular economy means, or maybe some people actually know more than others. So also make sure that you invite all voices to the table. So when that current state is known, the future state is known, then the final step is, how do you define the roadmap to get there? And that is indeed then about those actionable strategies that you can identify and also prioritize. So for example, if you have taken the product level, what you can do is really focus on material level strategy. So you have a product, can you switch from virgin content to recycled content? Or if it's more on the business model, can you go from to a subscription model rather than a selling model? But also here again, the key success factors will indeed be to adapt the solutions to the local context, and also identifying the skills need within a company, but maybe also in the system around it, so that actually that future vision can be realized. So I would say, taking one more minute or so, that it is like a mix of carrot and sticks. So if you want to create this level playing field for business models, companies will have to take the lead and start offering incentives to their customers to, for example, also increase the take-back rates of electronics. Maybe they can offer them a discount. But also there is the need for sticks from the government. So to get the laggards forward. And here an example I would like to share is that in France, a country here, like a neighboring country to the Netherlands where I'm from, almost, they have introduced the repair index. So where companies for 5 types of electronics products are basically mandated to give them a ranking from 0 to 10 how repairable the product is. So that I will share the link in the chat to an article that actually outlines the pros and cons there. But I do think it's this balance.
Yes, I do wonder how much companies respond to getting a carrot first, because we look at regulations as a stick more often than not, but seeing it as an opportunity, as you said in your first step, looking at the whole supply chain as a full, and seeing the opportunity there itself a motivator, and you don't need the government stick to run behind companies.
Well, I definitely think that how I typically say it, it depends a bit who you have on the table. Those who still have to be convinced, there you have to really perhaps more focus on the opportunities and indeed show that it can either be a cost reduction or like that they can sell. In some cases, maybe first get their minds ready. Oh, well, it's not about selling less or bigger cost. No, there's opportunities to maybe even sell more whilst keeping ownership over your product. So therefore reducing costs, because if you have to get the materials back, then you can lower the cost with the, maybe also shortage of certain materials for specific products. And then there's indeed also those, if you take that value chain perspective, who then realize that also indeed as a company, you have to take responsibility by enabling transparency across the value chain, etc. So I would say it really depends who we have on the other side of the table, what arguments we use, but it's definitely helping if you indeed visualize that value chain, that then sort of a light bulb goes off and the excitement starts for the circular opportunities.
If nothing else, the government stick at least can act as a starting point or a spark for the companies to at least start thinking of that. But one thing actually, Tamara, that you mentioned, and with that I'll actually be moving on to our next panelist. Additional question for our next panelist is this idea of transparency, or the idea of public disclosures, this data sharing. So my next question actually, Swati, is to you. Given your experience in working with municipalities, local bodies, we call them both in India, how do you think the collaboration between municipalities, municipal bodies, and pollution control boards can be leveraged to ensure whatever enforcement needs to happen for the circular economy regulation happen? And under that, an additional question for me would also be, what are the strategies or mechanisms that these municipal bodies can use to support pollution control boards in all of the monitoring, compliance, maintaining all of the data requirements, so that this public disclosure is there points, and this data transparency is also there?
Thank you. Thanks, Shivangi, for that very tricky question. And it was really lovely to hear the previous insights from Tamara, and thanks for having me over as well. Well, it's a double-edged sword, like how ULB or PCB complement each other. But so to say, an urban local body or municipality is the doer. So, of course, in terms of the work that they are meant to do, of course, implementation has to be strengthened, and assuring compliance by adopting stream-specific waste rules is something that they are to do by text, at least. And in terms of some of the gaps that exist on the ground is, of course, there's dearth of technical capacity. So that's why, many a times we don't really have the data to establish leakages or to establish, the problem areas that are there in terms of streams. Because the waste is a subject of the municipality, but it's not just limited to municipal waste. And even if we deep dive into municipal waste or plastics, it's far more complex right now. It's not just wet and dry. It's multiple waste streams, embedded into one. So, of course, establishing more collaborative models at ULB level and engaging with both formal and informal channels is the need of the hour. We have really good examples, that have tried to address these barriers. Second, of course, would be strengthening documentation and data gaps. And of course, we can go to any extent on this, but having more robust data inventorization mechanisms in place. There are numerous tools that are available now, and its use, of course, can be standardized. Secondly, also strengthening the local bylaws to cement and strengthen implementation on the ground, especially if you're looking at the aspect of circularity, because we see how dynamic the field is. There's a city that's doing a wonderful job under an administrator, and as soon as the person changes, it all falls flat. So that's why strengthening local bylaws is very, very pertinent, and including concepts of circularity, adopting zero waste systems is the need of the hour. Also engaging with a wide network, not just say private agencies, not just NGOs, not just informal channels, but I would also add here educational and research based institutions that are there in city. It would always add on to a ULB strength. So something, a technical task like inventorization could be actually outsourced to, say, a college or a university or a prominent research institution that's based out of a city or in a district. And also, I mean, I feel, putting the right economic incentives as well as disincentives when we look at various waste streams, I think is very much important. So, for instance, we've had single-use plastic bans in cities, but it hasn't really worked. The alternative industry hasn't really flourished because on the ground, at least we haven't really looked into the economic, social, and environmental viability of the alternatives and also of what is already there. When it comes to PCBs, of course, from their traditional role of monitoring, ensuring enforcement and compliance, I think what's important is to establish more robust monitoring mechanisms. We have the EPR portal, which is one such wonderful example of having integrated multiple stakeholders across the plastic value chain. But it would be great if we could address similar, something similar or maybe different or something more innovative for other waste streams as well, because it's not just plastic that is problematic as of now. There's textiles waste as well, which is, I think, as an issue becoming as much problematic as plastics in cities, especially in the municipal waste value chain and stream. Secondly, what PCBs could do and support ULBs would be by standardizing inventorization mechanisms, because as I said, there are so many tools available, which to use, when to use. If it's specifically around plastics, then which tool would help perhaps better, or if it's for other streams, then which one. And also build capacities on the ground. I think they could really take the lead on the training aspect. This was addressed by Ashish Tiwari ji as well, but also work with BIS to have more robust standards for plastics, recycled products, or other streams. And if possible, and if it's within the capacities, to also inventorize various stakeholders in cities that would support circular economy. This could be outsourced to the state pollution control boards or the regional or district level officers. But there are common concerns, and I'll end there. Just two concerns that are there, even while these could be the possible solutions. One is that we are still looking at downstream aspects when we talk about circularity. We are still talking about recycling, so we haven't really reached the upstream and the midstream space when it comes to resource management. And also, how do we mainstream circular products? It's a big task. I think I saw a question where they've said there's a similar GST for 18% on say a plastic toothbrush and a bamboo. So how do you mainstream alternatives, and how to create an enabling environment that would reduce barriers for circular products over one-time use products, and also alternately to create systems that support the channelization of alternatives, because to me then we may solve one problem but create another. So I think I leave it there. Yeah. Thanks.
That last comment is absolutely true because time and again I keep going back to the fact that when we were kids, the cutting down of trees for any paper packaging used to be the biggest deal. Plastic was such a boom that, oh, you're not cutting down trees anymore. And we have now sort of circled back to a point where we are going back to paper packaging. We don't know how to handle plastic. So yes, we need to think of systems that don't sort of, this is not the economy we are trying to circularize. We don't need to go round and round across address both points. You mentioned a few examples of the mechanisms, kind of mechanisms that ULBs can use for this. Can you give us a couple of examples of that?
Yeah. I think one could be, of course, coming from the ground. One, of course, would be more robust monitoring mechanisms. We have a city, Vijayawada, which I think I had visited a few years, about a year back, and it was interesting to see that on a common dashboard they could say, for instance, review their entire channelization of waste, right from the ground to its movement from, say, residential and commercial blocks to a processing site, from there to a biogas plant. It could be, say, monitored from a common center. So one aspect could be, of course, utilizing innovation and AI based technologies to track the waste flows. Secondly, could be more of a regulatory approach where, as I also mentioned earlier, one could strengthen your local bylaw and cement the policy to have more effective implementation on the ground. Third would be more a capacity development oriented approach, where I think Ambikapur is a fascinating example, where they sort of went ahead and trained these 440 women self-help group to lead, municipal solid waste management, plastic waste management, and they were capacitated over a period of time, and their strengths were enhanced over a period of time, so that they're not only the collectors, but they're also the recyclers in the city. But of course, that's more of a downstream circular approach. We have to rise, maybe two steps above that. Or perhaps the state of Goa, for the moment, that is sort of taking a step forward and working with its local governance and municipalities and having a deposit refund system policy for the entire state to reduce leakages, to ensure that packaging and plastic bottles and glass bottles sort of re-enter, the recycling loop, which is like benefit plus plus, not just to the state, the local municipalities, but also to the private companies and brand owners to sort of meet their EPR targets. So these are some of the mechanisms, that are there, and learnings from these could be derived, and they could be sort of replicated on the ground for other geographies and cities in India or South Asia, for that matter. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you, Swati. I'll actually that just brings me to the question for my next panelist, actually. Dr. Shantanu, if you're there, this next question is actually for you, because when we're talking about municipal bodies and state pollution control boards or pollution control boards working together, I'll bring the conversation a little closer in terms of extended producer responsibility regulations, right? In implementation of these newer regulations or the changes that have come across, there are various changes that crop up, especially at grassroots level. So please share some insights into the challenges that your team has been encountering in effectively implementing these regulations, and how do you think the collaboration between regulatory bodies, whether it be pollution control board or any other regulatory body, with these collection agencies, recycling systems, this ecosystem can help mitigate these challenges and also help with compliance while fostering a level playing field.
Yeah.
Over to you, Dr. Shantanu. Yes, you are.
Good afternoon, Deepali, Sivangi, Swati, and Tamara. I'm surrounded by a lady group of panelists. I'm the only odd man out since odd one out. And yeah, good evening. So See, I'll give you a brief detail of what is happening as of now in the country, in India first. Because of circular economy, that Niti Aayog is emphasizing on this circular economy, lots of things are happening. You talk about biomining of all legacy waste or solid waste. There are hundreds of that legacy dump sites where that biomining is being done all across the country, not only in Assam, but everywhere. And that is a very positive sign for the country. And all the plastic waste or all other waste, even US also, that after biomining, these are segregated and sent to the destined places, including recycler, including co-processing. It is happening now. In the other side, like for the solid waste disposal, all pickle slash treatment plants and all, these things are coming because of that one NGT order in original application 606. In Honorable NGT, there is a verdict. So every state is working on this, and there are very large number of success stories as of now. So we are very hopeful. That hazardous waste management also is a similar line of e-waste, and we had more problem of hazardous waste. It was identified earlier, and now e-waste is also getting same focus. Now for hazardous waste, very recently, Central Pollution Control Board, they have established the national tracking system. And I am very sure I am part of the Central Pollution Control Board. I am from there, and I am on deputation to the State Pollution Control Board as of now. But the policy making, I know the insights. So there are definitely that national tracking system, like hazardous waste, for hazardous waste, which is already implemented. This will definitely come for the e-waste. It has to come, and then definitely when all bulk consumers or manufacturer producers are brought in a same platform, there will be recyclers and even that all other stakeholders. When they will come in the same platform, so things will definitely make a smooth move. So we are hopeful in this. Now, as of now, again in India's situation, very recently I have seen one state-of-the-art that e-waste recycling facility have been developed by Resustainability together with some USA collaboration in the name of ARM Redland. They have spent around 150 crores for establishment, and it is ready for commissioning. And what they have claimed, this is one of the 5 such plants across the globe. So it is a very sophisticated one. We have seen everything is ready for commissioning. It will be commissioned very soon, and they have already made agreement with RBI and made lockers and all for storing the precious metals like gold and other metals. So, and when they are doing this one, and again I repeat, they are telling this is one of the five units in the world. So they have come at very nicely, and with a definite target to collect the waste for proper recycling. Earlier, waste were sent to Belgium and other places, and India, we did not have that much with anyone with that much of sophistication. Again, that is a positive sign. Now, in the state, small state like Assam and all, we were having problems. That Pollution Control Board, we face so many issues. See that producers or manufacturers, they tell in the internet or in the web page, we can see this is a collection center. But when you go there, you don't see the collection center, or maybe people sitting there also, they are also not knowing what is happening. So those gaps were definitely there, but there are again some success stories. There are some very good schools, good public schools are there in Guwahati. So they made it mandatory for all the students to bring some sort of any sort of e-waste to the schools, maybe once in 15 days or something. And this is really working, madam. They made a system, and then they are being collected. So they find it. Definitely in our home we find so many old mobile sets or any other e-waste. So schools are getting, they are collecting the waste like that, and that model. Again, I am from a village. I heard one day that people are coming. People are coming. They are giving 1 or 2 live chickens. That chicken bird. So that's replacing. They are telling that if you are having any old mobile set, you give us, and we are giving in that this live chicks. And this is not in organized sector, I'm sure, but this is that system also is happening in the very remote villages of the state. So waste are being collected. Now, what was happening in other places, like we are having so many public sector units, some CPSU or state public sector units. There, they were submitting us return. Now, in the new rule, that return format is it is not there. Submission of return is not there. But all the units, they were submitting return, and they were auctioning the e-waste through MSTC. In India, we are having that central level agency, MSTC, Metal Scrap Trading Organization Corporation. So at a central level, it is being auctioned through e-auctioning and all. So that system is still in force. And in the state, we are now say we cannot have so many of recyclers, but some dismantlers are now we're there. Now those dismantler or collection center, they are upgrading themselves to some sort of recycling, and finally that partially recycled or segregated metal will definitely go to the final recyclers. So those recyclers also coming. But where so far, where main problems are there with the bulk consumers, like say big educational institutes. We are having AIMS is there, IITs are there, and so many universities, central universities are there. They are the bulk consumers, but their waste generated from there, these are not streamlined so far. And Pollution Control Board also, we cannot, that provisions of the rules is not so far that giving any tooth to deal with this one. So, but again, we can definitely feel that now with lots of awareness, like the example I have given to the school. So these awareness programs are coming. So PR organization roles will be definitely there to generate awareness, and maybe there will be the linkage between the bulk consumers and the recyclers. This that US rule and that system, so it is being streamlined. Being streamlined, but definitely some more development will be there in the recent times. So it is the starting point, we can say. But let us hope for the good things, that there will be proper recycling. What Tiwari sir was telling regarding that all the ULPs, thousands of ULPs can be made tell as a collector or this one. But again, from Pollution Control Board, I feel that, see, there are duties assigned to various stakeholding departments like Pollution Control Board or State Environment Forest Department, or to the ULPs. So when they perform the assigned duties, they may not be named as the collector or recycling point. Once the portal is defined, all the EPR things come. So it will be streamlined, I feel. But as of now, from Pollution Control Group, okay.
I do wonder, sir, you also brought up urban local bodies, and we were discussing the role that urban local bodies can play. One of the common themes that I've come across is the need for collection of data on ground. And there are various challenges that our panelists have highlighted. Sometimes it's a lack of technical knowledge. Sometimes it's a lack of formal workforce on the ground. So there are various challenges. Do you think ULBs can play that role for pollution control boards, where they help pollution control boards gather this information, gather this data based on the work that they're doing?
See, that, when we talk about the bulk consumers, again, the important bulk consumers is data generated from the bulk consumers and all, generation of the US from the bulk consumers or other institutes, or that ULBs cannot help directly. But I saw some success story in Sikkim, Gangtok, where the ULBs were collecting the e-waste from the dump site. Now biomining is happening, so dump sites, different types of waste are being segregated. So that can be collected, and they, yes, they definitely can route it to the recyclers. They can play a major role. So what they have to do, they have to install the facility for storage first. Once it was two truckloads of e-waste was flagged off by the minister from Gangtok. I have seen that one. It was routed to the recycler.
Yeah.
So UFP's role is always there.
Thank you, sir. Because so Swati, I'll actually come back to you on that question for urban local bodies, because I'm what mechanisms, like apart from data collection and provision and maintenance of data, how can this data sharing also support businesses? Because yes, there are challenges in how equipped ULBs are right now in even collection of this data, but they essentially are decentralized, sort of decentralized establishments in each city. Each city has its own, at least one municipality or its own municipality. And considering how important data is, how can municipalities contribute to this collection of data, and how can this data also be leveraged by other stakeholders like businesses, policymakers, recyclers, producers, in whatever choices they are making when they're planning their circular economy strategy?
Thanks, Shivangi, for this very important question. Of course, I mean, from a municipality's point of view, and also having worked on this area for quite some time now, data is quite critical for more informed decision making on the ground to plan better and implement better. And in spite of having, say, a policy backbone in place, reasonably well policy backbone, and reasonably established practices on the ground that one can learn from, often the lack of data leads to ineffective planning and coordination and collaboration on the ground. And from experience, cities typically, they do not have data beyond what is collected or how much is stored to processing or disposal sites. We clearly need more layers to it. For instance, how much is generated, collected, from which channels is it collected, formal, informal, household, commercial, institutional, or others. Where does it goes for processing, how much is processed, how much is disposed, where it's disposed, and also map the entire waste flow of what gets processed, what gets burnt, what gets buried, what get leaks in water or through other channels, and elaborate more on the numbers. And of course, stream specific if it's possible. In an ideal situation, it should be stream specific. Without data on waste, for sure, we'll never be able to plan for the present or develop future capacities and strengths. For instance, say for plastics, how many processing centers or MRFs should come up, or sorting or channelization stations? How can we link the informal sector? What could be the manpower that can be envisioned or planned per sector? And what is the expansion plan? Because of course, the quantums are increasing by the year. And who are the various actors available and how can they be integrated? So without having all this knowledge, I think if you really want circular interventions on the ground, data is integral to it. And of course, I mean, there is why this not happens on the ground is clearly because ULBs are not they are not capacitated enough, or they are highly understaffed to carry such an enormous task to get all this data. And there's where integration can come in the picture, as I was explaining before. Perhaps research institutions, perhaps civic society organizations or voluntary organizations that could come involve with ULBs and support them on inventorization activities. This could also, while be done with support from PCBs. And as I said before, there are several tools available. Of course, there would be India-specific tools, but globally, there's circular assessment protocols developed by UGA. There's the Waste-Wise Cities tool developed by UN Habitat. There's a UNEP GPML platform, which really helps in informed decision making, utilizing and generating data So not only this could define robust inventory, but also help in reducing leakages, to plan to reduce leakages on the ground, also to create waste flows so that if you can visualize, okay, this is the kind of waste generated in my city and these are the flows, this is the problem area and this is how I need to adapt and mitigate this. So you can always plan better. You can always integrate and collaborate better because you know who is your stakeholder that you're dealing with within the city, district, state. And so I mean, I clearly feel data is imperative right now. We have everything else but the data. And once you have that, you can clearly have effective and enhanced circular economy practices on the ground. Because only if we know where the loopholes are, we can plan and implement better, not just for the present, but also for the future. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But I have a question for actually Dr. Dutta on this part, because I do wonder, sir, from your perspective, and just a little context in case anyone is not familiar with Assam. Assam is a relatively small state in India. It's also hilly, very, very hilly state in India. So it poses its own challenges and that need to be addressed. Like we have challenges even in plain states or states which have really well built infrastructure. There are challenges there. So in a hilly region, there's separate challenges altogether. But sir, for you, I have a question that considering how important this entire aspect of standardization, data collection, data analysis is, are there any specific reporting formats, reporting structures that you see need to be implemented as a state pollution control board that will contribute to this?
See, the generation of data is a big challenge, not only for US, for all other streams of waste, but with that the streamlining process, say like that EPR portal started for this plastic waste, it is helping us now. Now we can say that this much of waste are being generated. Again, when you go for validation of those data, you see lots of gaps. So things are improving, but we need the data. These are the data sources. I'll give you another example how things are now. Things will help each other. Now that vehicle scrapping policy of the government, it is declared by the central government. Then it is adopted by many of the governments, and many of the states they have the own policy regarding vehicle scrapping. So end of life vehicle scrapping centers are there. So one of the waste component is the e-waste generation from the scrap vehicles. So when these facilities come up, so we'll have some idea that this much of vehicles have been scrapped and this much of e-waste is generated from there. Like that, when the systems are coming to the place, those data will get some relevant data. Otherwise, when you get the data from the ULBs, many components will be missing. Like that, it will be very difficult to quantify for the ULBs the quantum of the hazardous waste or hazardous waste generation. Because that all bulk consumers or other major institutes, it will go to the recyclers, but when they come into the portal or the tracking system, that is why I'm asking for a tracking system and we'll get the feedback from Central Pollution Control Board. So that tracking system will be definitely helpful to generate the data also. Otherwise, the data we receive from the industries is very difficult to validate, and that proper quantification is definitely not there.
Yeah, I completely get it. It sort of goes back to Deepali's point as well, that we need a base system to also record this data in, because otherwise we are comparing apples to oranges, literally. So if the unit in which this data is being recorded, in the manner in which this data is being recorded, if that is not harmonious, there will be no way for a pollution control board or a policy maker to be able to get these decisions that are needed.
Shivangi, I'll give you another example.
Yeah.
For This is for plastic waste. With respect to plastic waste, what is happening, I tell you. Say the state is having 6-7 recyclers for generation of the plastic waste and the recycling of the plastic waste. They have the defined capacity. Say 200 tons of plastic can be recycled in a day. But from most of the parts of the state or from a nearby state, the waste are still going outside from the informal sector. And this is happening not only for plastic waste, for other waste also. So those data, how we collect the data and that in a good platform, it will be very difficult, challenging, but let's hope.
Yeah, absolutely. But as like the plastic bottle is a very good example to play here, because by having the central platform, even if all the fields are not being covered, you still have a central place for this data to be recorded, and you can keep improving on it. Thank you, Dr. Dutta. That does bring me to my next question to Deepali, actually. Because Deepali, I'm just wondering, we've been talking about how important it is for us to have this information here. But one of the bigger questions comes also, as we said, once we have this long list of checkpoints set up for ourselves, the data we need, how do we get businesses to adopt these reporting formats? Because when we say business, we are thinking of just large businesses, but that's not the case. In waste field, we are talking of literally micro entrepreneurs, very small scale entrepreneurs. So how do we incentivize to adopt these strategies and adopt them in good faith, so that they're consistently reporting accurate information, which will ultimately help the accountability, the verifiability, and the planning for circular economy?
I think that's a really very important aspect to focus on. How do you get even the lowest granularity of data to come in a way that is authentic, is verifiable, is trustworthy? And here, I think we should look at the fintech world for inspiration, because they've really been able to go down to those very small vendors, small traders, people who often have not even enough literacy to write their names, but are able to really operate these digital platforms, right? And I think leveraging digital technology in this space, coupled with AI and whatever fancy things, but really making it easier for those who are not maybe as literate to upload data, to be able to have that access, and also get incentivized for that data, right? So data is the new gold or the new oil, many comparisons to data. So if they are putting that data, if there is an effort that is required to put that data into a system, how can that system also transfer some of the benefits of that data down to the grassroots? So I think thinking around those things would probably help. I haven't got an example, I haven't come across it. But I think taking that example of the fintech world could be something to look at as a model to get inspiration and then have that replicated. But yeah, I think it's really important to get it down to the granular level. If you only get the data at the top, you don't really know where that pyramid starts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Dr. Shantanu had also pointed out at one point, was how do we quantify essentially? Because since quality is so subjective, we need to break it down to a metric that we can quantify, because that's when it becomes easy for someone upper in the or higher up in the value chain to analyze their data, but it's also easy for the grassroots people to record that data and report that data. It needs to be easy enough to record, but detailed enough to be analyzed and standard enough to be analyzed.
Yes.
No, I think fintech is an excellent example for that, because in India, I think a lot of people have gotten very used to online payments and online transactions. And it is very interesting to see that even though the plastic ban, that single-use plastic ban that we have, the fruit vendor that I go to has still not implemented that, but he does have a Paytm QR code that he uses to manage his payments. Yeah, that's absolutely an example that can be at least seen as how do we break it down into simple terms for them? So my last question now to Tamara, it's to you. Considering we know the requirement of circular economy and the need of circular economy because it addresses the resource related emissions and challenges that we have, but there's a very clear gap between the why of it and the how of it. How do we bridge that gap? So based on your experience, are there any key factors that you can that you have identified or have bridged that gap, and how can or businesses translate these factors into action points that be implemented on ground? Tamara, you're on mute.
Okay, that was double
we can hear
mute.
you now.
Yeah, okay.
No, please. Yes.
Yeah, so when I was reflecting on the topic of this webinar, so creating a level playing field, and also to your question, what are the key factors to bridge the why and the how? I realized that what I actually believe is necessary is that it's more about not so much maybe leveling the playing field, but opening up the playing field and inviting a diversity of players in, and even being more flexible to the rules of the game, or maybe being open to playing new games. Because to be honest, in the end, at least from here in Europe, but I think also global platforms, already quite a lot of studies and roadmaps have been created, even generically speaking, like what we do with the circularity gap report that you can see here on the background, or specifically to industry. So for example, the circular electronics partnership. So there are roadmaps out there with very specific recommendations and even actionable steps to various stakeholders, whether companies or governments or recyclers, the general public. So I would say that when it comes to identifying and reflecting on what actionable steps to take, I believe that it's more about shifting our mindsets also in the conversations that we have. And I think these are very important conversations, but that we should be careful not to rehash and reuse the terms and terminology that have been used in the linear world or in the business world over and over, and realize that a lot of free advice is actually available out there. So when it comes to the factors, then because of course there is in reality a gap. I fully agree with you here on the why and the how, because a lot has to happen. But that some of these key factors for me are about taking responsibility, taking ownership, regardless of what your position in a value chain is, or in the system that you operate in, or even within a company. So, for example, if you're a procurement officer, what can you do in your role to, for example, include requirements on the use of the circular electronic on the use of electronics that you purchase? Can you ask your suppliers, hey, do you offer repair services? Or what is the level of recycled content in the equipment that I want to buy from you? Or it's about collaborating with others within or outside of your organization. So an example that I'm involved with as a facilitator is the Capital Equipment Coalition. And they are in the large high value equipment. And they individually as companies publicly commit to closing the loop. They state what actions they will take to do so. And also in a pre-competitive environment, they share best practices with each other so that they can also learn as they go about changing their business models. What barriers do they face? And we create white papers that, for example, we then share with government officials to understand what systemic barriers governments, for example, can take away. Another example I was thinking of is what can financiers or investors do? They should be willing to take more risks when it comes to providing a loan or maybe an investment to startups or scale-ups that offer circular solutions. So the Fairphone, you might know, that a modular phone. So it might be slightly more expensive, but at the same time, that is also because the lifetime of the phone is actually extended if you have it, and you can purchase separate components as a user. So,
or a framework laptop. A framework also does the same thing with laptops.
Yeah, I like that. So an example as well. And I think more like, let's say, the generic things to do are about indeed data, so that you know where to focus your attention. So as a company, do your best to collect the primary data, understand where your material hotspots are, so that you can take that responsibility, and knowledge. We should really also put effort, also what you do here with this webinar. We should share knowledge with each other and make the knowledge available to many players, so that everyone at their own level of influence can take those actionable steps. Sometimes maybe the small ones, and sometimes the more bigger policy changes.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Tamara, because I'll actually we close that the panel discussion with the sentiment, because do need to realize that circular economy is not a well-treaded ground that we are now walking on. It's something completely different, and something that you said, Tamara, that's stuck with me, is that we need to sort of get out of the mindset of the linear world and start thinking about this a circular economy, not from a perspective of, oh, we are retrofitting this idea into an existing system. It will be a separate system, and we need to then figure out how do we fit linear economy into this system. So, like one of the biggest things that has struck with me is whenever we talk of secondary materials, we start thinking of them as like leftovers after a big dinner party, a Thanksgiving lunch or dinner, or any other big dinner that we have. We start thinking of secondary raw materials like that, instead of thinking of them not as leftovers, but ingredients, right? So instead of thinking of them as the supply chain itself, and not. And another thing that you actually pointed out that I had not thought about, was also corporations can not only make this change from the perspective of manufacturers or manufacturers and OEMs of these products, but also as consumers of these products, because they hold such power because of their bulk size. Also start demanding these requirements from their sourcing, that your laptops need to be like this, or you need to provide a certain level of repairability in those programs. So to summarize the discussion, first of all, thank you to all the panelists, because there's such varying perspectives that each of you bring to the table, that's what enables us to actually think of things not only at a global level, but also at a regional level, which is very much needed, because we need to know exactly where we can't blindly adapt global strategies at a local level, or vice versa. So some of the gaps that our panel today sort of discovered, one of the major gaps was in terms of data collection and the capacity that is there on ground to a certain extent, and even how certain rules and regulations can support in the building of those capacities, or in the building of that database. The example that was taken by Dr. Shantanu about the plastics board, PCB, the Central Pollution Control Board, took this initiative, established this portal, and is managing it and slowly improving on it day on day. But it has become the central place for state pollution control boards to give their inputs and take information out of. So that is an important thing, to identify these gaps, to know where we're standing, to know what needs to be done. And what are the easy wins that we can immediately at least start working on, And one more thing that has always stayed with me when we're talking about this is whenever we're talking about standards and benchmark, there is a fine line that we are treading, because they need to be enforceable. They need to be enforced. That's where the stick comes from, but they also need to be adaptable, because a standard or a system that works in Uttar Pradesh, which is a vast area with high population, very plain in geography, topography, work in Assam, because just by sheer nature of its geography, its topography, and its demography, quite different. So it needs to be adaptable it needs to be strict enough to be enforced. With that, the floor to questions. There are some questions that people have put up in the chat. So I'll just shoot those questions off. Okay. So one of the has come is I think Deepali has also already answered, but I would love to see if any of the other panelists have any other inputs to give. Is the misconceptions about circular economy that you feel by different stakeholders have that might hinder its adoption? Question is open to any panelists if anyone wants to take it. Questions in the Q&A also.
Maybe I could start, and yeah, Tamara and Deepali and maybe our member secretary from Assam could add on to it. I think one, of course, is that not very clear to start with what is circular economy, and what it means in entirety. And as Tamara also said, we should be very mindful of the words we use. If you use waste and you're talking about circular economy, perhaps you're not addressing it, from the sentence one onwards. So one, of course, is, I feel we really need to have a terminology rule book for administrators, policymakers, stakeholders on the ground of what to use when we, sort of talk about circular economy. So we sort of get it wrong starting from there. Secondly, I mean, of course, when we say that we are addressing only the downstream component, so the misconception is also that only that is the challenge or that is the problem on the ground to mitigate. And that's why we sort of miss the entire discussion or implementation work around midstream and upstream innovation, or maybe that's why a lot of enhanced R&D or innovation with various sectors involved is not happening. So, I mean, at least to me, these are the two major, and maybe Deepali and Tamara and could add further on to it. Yeah.
Yeah, the things that came to my mind, I also shared it in the chat, is that perhaps a misconception that it's complex. So indeed, building on your one, Swati, that indeed it's maybe not understood, that it's costly, and that it's only about recycling, what has been touched upon as well, of course. Like, how can we indeed move away from, or waste? No, let's start changing the words we use, indeed, be mindful and show that in a way it's not new, it's not costly, it adds value, brings new opportunities, etc. How can we indeed make it also the exciting thing, and break those misconceptions?
I can't add any more to that. I think that is really where most people kind of say, oh, it's expensive, but it might be expensive in the short run, but not obviously in the long run. It depends on where you draw the boundaries of an LCA. It depends on where you look at in terms of the time horizon. If you're looking at 1 quarter, if you're looking at 1 year, or if you're looking at a 10-year span, how does that change? Right? So I just maybe, to what Swati said, I was just reading a really interesting article a few weeks ago. And in that, the author was arguing that waste as a terminology in policy did not even exist till like the 1940s, 1950s. It was only, post World War II that waste really became a part of policy as such. Like, you had a waste policy. So before that, it was not considered as waste, and obviously it was used much more. There was a lot less waste. It was less single use and things like that. So, I think totally the terminologies we use, the discourse we have, is also important in how we understand something, whether it's a resource or not. So, and of course, talking to the converted is much easier than those who are on the other side of the table. This audience, I'm sure, is very, very aware of that. But yeah, I think for a broader audience, maybe that's an interesting topic to bring up to, change these misconceptions.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And also, I think you brought up a really good point, Deepali, like the short-term vision versus the long-term vision, because for any industry, if I look at any significant technological development that has happened in the past 200 years, initial adoption of the technology definitely was always costly. It was once it was adopted, a base level of research had been done, and then players started stepping in to commercialize it. That's when it became mass produced and became cheaper. Well, that's the pattern, but at least part of that pattern will very well be true here as well, because initially it will be costly. Back in 90s, when the entire internet boom was happening, it was very costly for a lot of companies to do that shift. And those that did are benefiting from that today. So I always try to think of it and one of the things that I love doing is actually explaining a lot of these concepts to my mom, because she is a external party not involved in waste. So if she's able to grasp exactly what's happening, I know at least I've given the concepts. And the way I, a lot of the times I may try and explain it to her is that don't look at a landfill or a waste pile, using that terminology, like it's waste. I look at it more like a mine site. I'm mining that material. And once I've mined it, whatever recycling I'm doing is basically, if I'm creating an analogy there, that my collection, legacy, biomining, all of those are just my mining practices, that I'm mining those resources. Recycling is refining for me, right? And once those separate materials are there, you have a market who needs to pick it up. It's not a perfect analogy in any, but that's usually how I end up looking at it, that you need to look at less from a, oh, this waste was generated, we need to manage it, and more from the perspective of, oh, these resources are there, we need to take advantage of them. And yeah, one of the biggest gaps is that we don't know what resources and in what quantity we have right now. And we need to address that absolutely. If there are any more questions from the group, would be more than happy to take. If the panelists have any questions they want to ask the other panelists, please feel free.
Hey, Shivangi, so we do have a question for the member secretary. Can't hear it. Okay, so the one is, so do you believe biomining is actually solving the problem? Because a large fraction of reject is backfilled, metal content is high in the extracted compost, and the co-processing is not getting a buy-in from cement plants. So if you could share your reflections on this, sir.
No, I see biomining, this is actually enforced by the NGT, Honorable NGT, that all dump sites have to be biomined. And where I see hope is practically happening. It may not be 100% recycled material is going to the for co-processing in the cement mills, but still it is going. Huge fraction of it is going to the cement mills for co-processing, and then that soil and other particles recovered, soil material recovered, they are going for making further compost, making manure. It is still from biomining process also. I have seen in Assam. This is bought by the some units to make compost. Some sort of manure they definitely put on the additives, and it is being used. Similarly, it is coupled with the construction and demolition waste management facilities. So where that already all that construction and demolition waste that can be recycled into making tiles and all these things. This is proven and it is successfully happening in many places. It's not happening in Assam as of now, but construction and demolition, we have so many success stories including Delhi. So materials are being recycled, and from biomining, I have seen in we have in Assam we have 103 ULBs, urban local bodies, smaller or bigger. At least in 25% of places, biomining has been started. So at least that old dumps, it is being reclaimed, and area is being again it is being developed into maybe recreational activities. It is happening. It is happening, and it is on the eye of NGT. Every state, I repeat, every state has given action plan for all the biomining at all the dumps, legacy dumps. And as per the solid waste management rule, present dumping practices should be, you should have secure landfill facility, you should have proper segregation, then only 15 to 20% of the material will go to the landfill. But again, that is not happening. In many places, again, present dump site is being converted into legacy dumps. Those are our difficulties and constraints. But all legacy dump site is definitely biomining is becoming, it is helping a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you. One last question I would like to take. These are two questions I would like to combine actually. The two participants who that any level playing field needs a certain level of research and development to back it up. Otherwise, you're just greenwashing, right? So what are the government's roadmaps in sort of building towards these guidelines? And not just the roadmaps, what are the types of wastes they are also looking at? Because we know through EPR, we have a few waste streams already captured, but what are the future waste streams that the government is looking at? So the question is open to the panel. Oh, I think Swati has something that she'll have to step out for. Thank you so much, Swati.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you so much. This would be the last question, and then we'll come.
Yes, Shivangi. I'd like to add one line here. See, in the present scenario, it is not only the e-waste or biomedical waste, solid waste, even all sort of industrial waste, and is given some attention. Say for used oil and all. Why it is coming under the circular economy? It is one of the major waste stream is identified under circular economy perspective. Why it is happening? Because it can be refined to the as pure as the original one. When you are using some lubricants in your vehicle, they get contaminated with various types of heavy metals in the due course of time, and say in a diesel generator, so every 6 months or so it is being changed. Entire quantity of the lubricants is replaced with a new one. And that old one is that replaced one get contaminated with some sort of heavy metals. But with the re-refining process, without adding any additives, they can be refined into the like in the original form. And that is where the economy lies. And that circular economy, sustainability development goal, then all these are so interlinked. It is helping each other like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like asking whether the chicken came first or the egg. It's sort of the circular economy goals are pushing these policies, and the policies are also then pushing the implementation of these goals.
When you implement, it is helping to protect the environment, enhance the economy, and so many like that. It is all correlated.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, participants. And before we close this discussion, I would also like to thank our sponsors, Apple, Dell Technologies, Canon, and Enterprises. Thank you, everyone who has attended today. Discussions like these are essential for us to make sure we take informed steps, whatever steps we are taking. So thank you for attending today, and have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Thank you for facilitating the discussion. Good to meet you all.
Thank you. My pleasure. You too. Thank you, everyone.